Okay, so why is Andy Warhol coming to the Booth Museum? Andy did Western art? That's the question I always get when I say the Booth Museum is hosting an exhibit on Andy. Andy did Western art? I had no idea. Well, that's the point of the exhibit. So this is a major traveling exhibition. There's, I think, 130 objects in the exhibition. And when we were getting ready to put this together, we knew that we couldn't pull it off by ourselves. And so we had put the word out through the Western art community, looking for a couple of partners. And we found great partners in the Tacoma Art Museum in Tacoma, Washington, which is one of the new kids on the block in Western art. They were given a major collection a few years ago by a family named Hobb. They were a German family. They owned the A&P supermarket chain. And their kids had ties to Tacoma. And so they gave this collection, several hundred pieces of Western art, to the Tacoma Art Museum. Not only did they give them the collection, they gave them the money to add on a wing to put it in. Those are cool donors to know, right, Diane? And so that was, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And they've been looking for some Western projects to put their teeth into. And so they handled the production of the book. That was their major contribution, was to shepherd the book through, as well as being a collaborating curator on the exhibition. We also worked with the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. Some of you may know it as the Cowboy Hall. That's what it was called for years, the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And they have handled the logistics, the loan forms, the shipping and transportation, a lot of that type of thing, which they're very good at. And that's been a big and wonderful partner to have. And then we were kind of in charge of the project and pulling the art together, identifying it, getting it here, and then being the lead venue. We kind of drove the initial layout of the way it'll be shown here, and then each of those museums will get the benefit of getting to come here and see how we laid it out and see how they may want to change it based on their space. We'll be using both of the two temporary galleries upstairs. Both of those are now closed and will be until this opens. I know that a lot of you who are in the building regularly know we're down an elevator, and we have some security issues with some of the art coming in next week. So bear with us next week if you can't get to the elevator immediately, because we will have art coming and going and need to maintain security. We also will be putting some curtains through the temporary gallery to let people access the elevator. If you don't need the elevator, if you steer clear of it, that would help us out as well. We're hoping to have the glass elevator back up by the time of the opening, but we've had a couple of issues with that. So, you know, best laid plans of mice and men. But if you could help us out with that, we would appreciate it. So Warhol in the West opens here August 25th. But again, for you members, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you get to come in early. We also had a great roster of sponsors for this exhibition, who we could not have done this without. This is by far, and I mean way far, the most expensive, complicated, and involved exhibition we have ever done. And we went to some of our key sponsors, patrons, members, and said, could you help us out a little bit? And one of the people who stepped up in a big way were Don and Eva Roundtree. They put a challenge gift out there for some other people to match, and we were successful with doing that. And I wanted to thank them and give them the first book that I signed when the book shipment came in. Another round of applause from around the table. They hate it when I do that. Another sponsor who's here today is Rick Drews, and I wanted to thank him on behalf of the bank for being a wonderful sponsor, not only here at the Booth Museum, but to the Bartow History Center and other great things throughout this community. Century Bank is really a key player and very involved in our community, and we appreciate them very much. I want to give Rick one of these books too. So Rick, that one's not signed, so if you want to re-gift it, you can, or you can see me later and I'll take care of that for you. But if you see any of these folks, please thank them for their support of this exhibition, because truly we could not have done this one without them. Oops. So, normally our advertising is very elegant and clean, and, we're saying what a wonderful hoity-toity art museum we are. Well, I thought when we did Warhol, we should go in a different direction. And that we should be a little irreverent and have a little fun with it. These are some ones I mocked up for the National Cowboy Museum to look at. And again, playing off that idea, Andy Warhol did Western art? Holy Geronimo! Who knew? Dying to see it. Is it too soon? Is that why you're groaning? How about no fooling? Is that better? This ad we actually ran in one of the auction magazines. Heritage Auctions gave us a free ad in their publication they send to collectors. And this is basically the ad that we ran, and had some cool comments back from folks who noticed. So that's the whole point, is to get noticed a little bit. I thought this one was pretty cool too. Now, you get problematic when you start dealing with rights issues related to Warhol, and then you double that when you deal with rights issues related with John Wayne. And one of the stories of this whole thing is that John Wayne's estate sued Andy Warhol's estate over the use of this image in the first place. So you really don't want to be wading into the middle of that too much. So we've not used this image as much as we would have liked to, but it's pretty cool. The Warhol Foundation controls all access to all of Andy's images, and they give a lot of money to the arts, the museums and art centers and art-based projects. But one of the ways they make that money is by licensing Andy's work. And so anytime you use it, even us doing an exhibition and promoting Andy's work, we have to pay rights fees to them. And there was a chunk of money in the original budget that would have gone for that. We were able to whittle it down through various means, and Sandy Scott led that project very well for us. But we still wound up paying a fair chunk that would have gone into advertising to rights to the Warhol Foundation. But that money's going to come back into the art community, so I don't feel as bad about it. So this is what got the whole thing started. When I came to work here in 2000, and we started surveying the initial collection that had been put together by an anonymous founder, there were these 10 Cowboys and Indians images that Andy Warhol did in 1986, as well as 4 other outcasts, which we'll talk about later. And I thought it was really an anomaly. What was Andy Warhol doing in this collection of pretty traditional Western art? And what was Andy Warhol doing messing around with Western stuff when he was playing with Campbell's soup cans and Brillo pads and Heinz ketchup and stuff like that? Why was he interested in these Western images? And so I always was thinking about that in the back of my mind, that this was in this collection, and how did it fit on both of those points? So when it came time to think about doing my master's thesis at the University of Oklahoma, 2003-04 time frame, this was one of the ideas I had in the back of my head for a possible topic for my master's thesis. Byron Price, who was my mentor and faculty advisor at OU, thought it was an okay topic. He wasn't totally enamored with it. He had a couple other ideas for me that he thought I should pursue perhaps instead. But James Ballinger, who was the director of the Phoenix Art Museum for about 30 years, came to do a lecture. Actually, it was an art for lunch right here. And I had dinner with him the night before, and I was talking about my academic situation and some of the ideas for my thesis. And the first one I threw out was Andy Warhol in the West. And he said, "Stop right there, don't tell me the rest. If you don't do that, you're an idiot." Well, I didn't want to be an idiot. But his point was well taken, and it served us well, both the museum and myself, in that this is a topic and a subject that transcends Western art, transcends American art even, and is not something like looking at an artist who was only in the West and only did Western things. This is an artist that is the most recognizable name probably in all of American art. and probably the most famous American artist around the world. And the fact that he did Western stuff, you know, is a big deal. Whether you like his work or not, it's important. And there's certainly lots of his work I don't like, and there's certainly lots of parts of his personality and the way he conducted himself that I don't like. But that does not take away from the importance of his work or the importance of this body of work within Western art. Fair enough? Yes. So here's the book I showed you earlier, done by the University of California Press. We have copies in the back. One of the things that the press did with us was each museum paid in a chunk of money to get the book produced, but also to buy the price down. So the book is 25 bucks. I mean, where are you going to find a 150-page art book for 25 bucks that has 100 illustrations in it? You're not. They wanted it out there, they wanted it dispersed, and so we kept the price point down on it. Now, don't be thinking about going to Amazon. Yeah, it's $1 cheaper on Amazon, but that doesn't help the museum. So, when I took up the challenge to do Warhol as a master's thesis, the question was, that group of images, the Cowboys and Indians suite, does that come out of nowhere? Is that the only time Andy really ever did anything Western? Did he have any other connections to the West? Or was it something he'd been building his whole career for? Now, if it had been the former, the paper would have been about 2 pages. Luckily, it was the latter, and I came up with 110 pages of mostly BS. That doesn't mean what you think it means. Basic stuff to fill the paper up and get my degree stamp. But really, Andy had a love affair with the West and had brushes with Western imagery throughout his career. It begins with the movies, like it does for most people. He said his most happiest times growing up were the Saturday mornings when his mom would give him a quarter and he'd go to the movies and stay there most of the day. And he undoubtedly would have seen a ton of Westerns. He kept a movie scrapbook where he would send off to movie stars and ask them for an autographed picture. Like Hedy Lamarr was one of his favorites. She was renowned to be the most beautiful woman in the world at that time. And he had an autographed picture of her in his scrapbook. Guess who else was in there, though? Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. And when the exhibit comes here, we'll have the scrapbook, and you'll see Roy Rogers' picture that Andy had in his scrapbook. He also was exposed to Little Giant books. You remember those? Like the ones in the picture? He had a bunch of those that were Western in his collection when he passed. Now, whether those are the ones he kept since he was a kid, or the ones he saw when he was a kid had gotten passed off and he replaced them later, we don't know for sure, but it doesn't really matter. We know that he had them. There's also a report by one of his cousins that when he was home from school sick for a long period of time, the year he was in the 3rd grade, his doctor gave him a cap pistol. And this cap pistol is unlocated. It was on the original inventory of all the stuff that went to the museum in Pittsburgh, the Andy Warhol Museum, but nobody can find it. Wouldn't that have been cool to have here? But we know he had it. And he probably played Cowboys and Indians with it. Now, think of Andy Warhol playing Cowboys and Indians. That's quite a visual, isn't it? Guess what this is? I think I heard it out there. It's not just an alarm clock, it's a Roy Rogers alarm clock. Andy had this in his collection. Whether he ever used it or not, we don't know, but it doesn't really matter. It's Roy Rogers, and it was in his collection. It will be in the exhibit. Whoa. Okay. So, when I get that question, Andy Warhol did Western art? I didn't know that. What did he do? I said, do you remember Elvis? Elvis is one of his first images. I mean, right there behind Campbell's Soup was Elvis and Marilyn Monroe and dollar bill signs. I mean, they were all there in the first couple of years of his career. They said, yeah, I remember he did Elvis. I said, what was Elvis doing in the picture? Did he have a gun? Yes, he did. He was a gunslinger. So Andy Warhol's main importance is been said by the critics that he was a mirror. He was a mirror that he held up to America. And he said, America, this is who you are. You are Campbell Soup and Brillo and Heinz 57. You are Marilyn Monroe, you're Jackie O, you're Elvis. That's the things that are important to you as Americans. That's who you are. So, Andy could have done Elvis as a teen idol singing sensation. That would have been Americana. He could have done Elvis as a teen idol singing sensation, matinee idol, movie star. Double Americana, right? But he chooses to do Elvis as a cowboy gunslinger. So, teen matinee idol, singer, gunslinger. Triple Americana, Americana cubed, okay? Layers and layers and layers of fame and Americana wrapped up in one image. This image he does for a show at Ferris Gallery in 1963. When you walk into the exhibition, you will feel like you've been transported to that exhibition. The whole end of the first bay of the gallery will be an installation shot from that exhibition. So watch out, Elvis will be pointing that gun at you when you come in. Don't be afraid, okay? Now, anybody know what movie this is from? We got some sharp people in the audience here, or they've heard this talk before. Flaming Star. Anybody seen it? Recently? Okay, so this movie starts out like you'd expect an Elvis movie to start out. There's a family scene. They're in the family home, very modest little ranch home. They're having a picnic of sorts. He breaks out the guitar, he starts playing. They're dancing around do-si-doing and swinging arms, and it's like 7 brides for 7 brothers. And then all of a sudden, these Indians knock the door down and start whacking people in the head with tomahawks. There's blood everywhere, gunshots, violence. I mean, it's about the most violent scene you can imagine, right on the heels of him singing this song. And it goes downhill from there. It is really one of the most violent Westerns I've ever seen. Elvis sings 2 songs, one at the beginning and one at the end. This is when he was trying to become a serious actor. He should have stayed home. Actually, he's not that bad. But he plays a half-breed with a Native American mother, white Anglo father, and they're warring back and forth, the Indians and the white people, and Elvis is torn in the middle. Which side should he be on? And he changes sides about 5 times in the course of the movie. And it's worth watching for the social commentary and the, just the fact that it's Elvis. The plot itself is not very good, and like I say, it's very violent, but it's worth watching for a couple of reasons. But this publicity image in the middle is the one that Andy used to make his art from. Andy was also a filmmaker. How many of y'all knew that? He made hundreds of films. Most of them are pretty darn boring. He did an 8-hour film of the Empire State Building. Spoiler alert, nothing happens. It's 8 hours in the Empire State Building. He did a 45-minute movie of a sunset. Spoiler alert, the sun goes down. He did a 12-hour movie of a guy sleeping. He rolls over twice. I mean, really, he made these movies. What he made the most of, though, were something called screen tests. And that's where he had people who were visiting the studio for one reason or another, and he would put them in a chair in front of a film camera. He'd load up a roll of the shortest film they had, which would be like about a 100-foot roll, and run 3-4 minutes. He would start the film going, and he'd walk away. And it really was a way to put people kind of off their game and not at ease when he was dealing with them, because then he could have the upper hand and put them at as unease as he often was. And so some people would sit there and just stare in the camera, some people would twiddle their thumbs, some people would light up a smoke, some people would freak out. And he called these screen tests. And there's hundreds of them at the Warhol Museum. We will have the one of Dennis Hopper, who was one of his really good friends, was a big supporter of his art, and owned a lot of Andy's art. And Andy did his portrait a couple of times, and we'll have one of Andy's portrait of Dennis here as well. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But more importantly to our story is Andy did 2 Western movies. This one you see on the screen is a scene from a movie called Horse. Now, Andy had rented a small horse to come to the studio and be the backdrop for this movie. Well, they couldn't get the small horse, so they brought this horse. It was called Mighty Bird. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be cooped up in a small confined place with a bunch of guys and a horse named Mighty Bird. But they did. And so it's a bunch of cowboys playing strip poker and talking about cowboy stuff and this horse in the background. And occasionally somebody would give some direction to somebody, go give the horse some loving and rub up on the horse. And eventually a fight breaks out, the horse kicks somebody in the head, and at the end somebody's singing opera. It's that well organized. Not worth watching. Now, Lonesome Cowboys is a little more important because it's a forerunner to Brokeback Mountain. And it features 5 cowboys of questionable sexual morality and a female lead and her doctor, who is also after the cowboys, just like she is. But they have no interest in her. Now, they filmed this at Old Tucson, in Tucson, Arizona, where many famous Western movies were filmed. And they actually hired some of the guys who worked on those movies to do some of the crew positions on this. And they said, where's the script? Script? We don't need no stinking script. We don't use scripts. And they're standing there holding the microphones and the lights and stuff, and they're just improvising. And one of the guys said to the other, said, doesn't anybody ever yell cut? They would just go till the film ran out. Fix it in post, I guess, was their thought. But in the lower right corner, you see Andy actually using the film camera. He was very involved. He was the director and one of the camera operators. So this film tells that story of those cowboys and the other people in the cast. And it won Film of the Year at the San Francisco Film Festival in 1969. In Atlanta, it was seized for being pornographic. That was the range of reaction to the movie. I think more interesting than the movie is the promotional material that they used to put it out with. In the center, you see one of the movie posters. I'm sorry, the other one's not in here, but there's a big poster and it says, Andy Warhol's Lonesome Cowboys may be too much for some people, but that's their problem. And then it goes on and says that it's a rollicking display of our favorite 4, 6, 8, and 10-letter words. Now, if you've done the math on that, I'm not sure what you come up with, but maybe we can compare lists later. But this was a big deal when it came out. How many of y'all remember it? Anybody that was around that time remember it coming out? It didn't get wide distribution, but within the arts community, it was pretty well known. So, fast forward a little bit. Andy goes into the hospital in February of 1987 for what should have been a routine gallbladder surgery. Now, the reason I say should have been routine was Andy Warhol had been shot in 1964. Y'all remember that? A lady who said Andy had too much control over her life walked in the studio, shot him and somebody else was in the studio with him. And she probably would have killed him on the spot, except her gun jammed on the 3rd or 4th bullet. They rushed Andy to the hospital. He was in surgery for hours and hours. At one point, they issued last rites. They thought he was dead on the table. They brought him back, and the rest of his life, he wore a girdle to hold his guts in, essentially. And he had some very poignant things to say about that. He said, having been that near to death, you would think that I'm not as scared as somebody who hasn't. I'm actually more scared. And he said, why would somebody hurt somebody like that? I mean, these are very introspective comments. He also said that he was never comfortable in a group of people really after that point. You know, who was after him and why. Now, he said he would never go to the hospital again because the next time he went to the hospital, he knew he was going to die. Well, sure enough, he went in to have this surgery. They did the surgery, everything was fine, he's recovering in a room, and he dies. There's a private nurse in the room with him when he dies. And after months of investigation, they still did not come up with the cause of death or why he died. It's still a mystery today. And he was only 60 years old. So, remember we talked about Remington? He died at 50. You know, 60 would be about the same age, you know, longevity-wise, as when Remington, when he died at 50. Imagine how much more he still had to do. And look at how much he did between 20 and 60. The most prolific artist of our time, and he dies at 60 years old. And the last major thing he did before he died was the Cowboys and Indians project. Now you think that would make it important, right? It actually got smothered by everything else surrounding his death to the point that most people don't know about it. What people found out after he died was what a prolific collector he was. There were 10,000 objects in his house. Now, how many of you have had to clean out somebody's house after they passed? And there's a lot of stuff in the house, right? 10,000 objects. Most of them he did not live with. He was a shopaholic. He went shopping almost every day. He bought something almost every day. He brought it home and seldom unwrapped it, or took it out of the bag, or took it out of the box. There were like 23 rooms in his house. He lived in about 4 of them. The rest were storage for his stuff. Now, among the things he loved to buy the most were Indian art. Rugs, baskets, beadwork, tomahawks, jewelry, you name it. He loved it and he bought it. Such that this is the catalog for the sale at Sotheby's in 1988 when they sold all this material. Now it passes in February of '87. They can't pull this this auction off until over a year later. It takes them that long to catalog all the stuff, get it photographed, put the details together. They showed most of, if not all of the objects at Sotheby's. They just had this huge yard sale looking thing with all this stuff. This is the catalog for the sale. 10 days. Non-stop for 10 days, they were selling his stuff. One whole day was nothing but his Indian collection. This is the cover of the book for the Indian Day. And again, he didn't live with this stuff, but they tried to stage the house or fluff the house in such a way that it looked like he did. Or at least, you know, they took all the stuff out of the packaging and made some interesting looking little still lifes with it. The painting in the back is unlocated. It's an 1800s Indian painting. You can see a lot of jewelry and artifacts in the foreground there. This is one of the pictures from inside the catalog. Again, whether any of this stuff was there the day he died, nobody knows for sure, or whether it was just completely done by the stagers who came in. But those photographs going up the steps, those are Curtis photographs. Edward S. Curtis. He owned 300 of those. The same 9 images you see in that picture will be in our exhibition. This is one of his baskets that he owned. He was not a connoisseur level collector for the most part, but he did know what he was looking at. He just didn't necessarily buy the best stuff because other people around him said he was cheap. For instance, he said he loved the blankets and the rugs with holes in them because they were more sculptural. His friends said he liked them because they were cheaper and he could buy more of them. One of his best friends said he wondered how come Andy didn't buy less things and buy better ones. And Jim Dunham and I have always had this conversation about collectors. You know, people who hoard collect and have thousands of something, you know, could have put the same money into having 10 of the best in the world. Well, the problem was, he said, you know, that would have meant less activity for Andy. For him, it was about the activity of looking at it, finding something he liked, buying it, bringing it home. It wasn't about connoisseurship. Do I own the best one in the world, or do I own the most in the world? Whenever Andy was described by an interviewer as to what he was wearing when he came to the interview, More often than not, he was wearing cowboy boots. They have 27 pair of his cowboy boots at the Warhol Museum. Actually, they only have 22 now because 5 of them are in our basement, and they'll be in the exhibition. About half of them are like these pair, and they have paint all over the bottom of them, which means he was wearing them when he was painting in the studio. The other half are pristine. Those would have been the ones he would have worn out to Studio 54 or out to an evening out. And many of them are Lucchese's. People ask me what brand. He bought a lot of those. He also bought them in Europe. There's a story about him going down the Champs-Élysées in Paris and going into a famous store and buying cowboy boots. I think somebody else was buying those. This is a bolo tie from his collection. Another basket. There were 2 cowboy hats in the museum collection. Those are both here. So let's talk a little more about his art. Andy said that he had no political leanings, no axe to grind, no social commentary in his work. He's just that mirror. It's just the surface. If you scratch the surface, there's nothing under it. Do we buy that? Well, let's see if we apply that test to this piece of work. In 1976, when America is celebrating its bicentennial and patting itself on the back for 200 years of being a great country, as we should, Andy chooses to perhaps go in a little different direction. And he asks some of his friends at the Ace Gallery in California who might be the most radical or unconventional Indian person in the United States. And several people come back and tell him this person, Russell Means. Russell Means was one of the leaders of AIM, the American Indian Movement. And if you remember back in the 70s, they seized Alcatraz, they seized Wounded Knee and some other places. They were doing that under the auspices of several of the American treaties that we had with the Indians that said if there was federal land not being used, the Indians were welcome to go live on it. Well, Alcatraz was sitting there being unused, and so they went out there and set up camp. Well, we didn't really mean that when we said that in the treaty. But those are the kinds of things that were going on. They followed these guys around and eventually caught them doing something illegal. He went to jail for a while. And Andy chooses to do a series of portraits of him in 1976. Think there's no social commentary or political leanings in that? I don't think so. But they are very introspective portraits. In the catalog for the exhibition, it was written that Andy had sympathy for the Indians and sided with their cause. You know, again, whether he wrote this or not, we don't know. Means writes a very spirited defense of his actions and what AIM was up to and what they're trying to accomplish. And it was noted that Andy had made a donation, perhaps $5,000 was mentioned a couple of places, to AIM in return for Means posing for this series. Okay, so I mentioned Dennis Hopper. Andy did Dennis's portrait a couple of different times. This is the most famous one, and obviously the most germane to us. It shows Dennis in a cowboy hat and pays homage to the westerns that he was in. Most notably, because of the hat, which movie would that be?
Is it Giant?
Giant. We had to bring the ringer in for that one. In the movie Giant, he plays the son of this larger-than-life ranch figure, kind of like a McClintock or something, if you remember that. And for Christmas, he gets a cowboy hat, and he goes to put it on. It's about 3 sizes too big. And it's a real, psychological simile that, he's not big enough to wear his old man's hat, and that he's not big enough to take on the responsibilities of the ranch and so on. So that's kind of the story. Whether he's actually playing into that or not, maybe not, but we like to connect those kinds of dots in art history, right? One of the most stunning images in the exhibition is George O'Keeffe. The image in the center is Andy's print/painting of her, and it's done as a photographic negative that gives her a real ghostly appearance, which she kind of had anyway, don't you think? Looking at that Polaroid on the left. He did this when she was in her 90s, and there's actually a story about her coming to lunch at the studio with Andy, and Picasso's daughter, Paloma, was there. along with some other celebrities. Can you imagine George O'Keeffe here and Picasso's daughter here, and you're sitting between them at lunch? That would have been a pretty cool table to be at. And she was 97, I think at the time, 96, 97, and they were planning her 100th birthday party. I think they got a little ahead of themselves, and they might have brought some karma in because she died when she was 98 and a half. She didn't make it. But this image, which is purple, in the one we have in the exhibition, it looks like she is looking right through you, and it's a little unnerving even to stand in front of her. It's such a cool image. Now, in both of these, I've shown the Polaroid pictures with these that Andy took. The way he did most of these portraits was he had a Polaroid big shot, and he was a spokesman for Polaroid. And he would take these Polaroids, and then he would have transparencies made. He would then project those images up, trace them or draw along the lines of those, and then create these screen printed pieces from that. If it was paint on canvas, it was a painting. If it was ink on paper, it was a serigraph. The difference between a painting and a print in Andy's world is about this much, but they are different. So he then would experiment with different colors and different ways of presenting it, but we will have those Polaroids in the exhibition as well. So you'll see the Polaroid, you'll see what he did with it. R.C. Gorman, one of the most famous Native American artists of all time, speaking of Picasso, the New York Times called him the Indian Picasso. And so you see the Polaroid on the left, and then you see what Andy did with it on the right. He didn't mess with this one too much. Fritz Scholder, another famous Native American artist. Now, whether they traded art with Andy for this or not, I'm not exactly sure. The records aren't real complete. But at the very least, they had their portrait done. And in both cases, Gorman and Scholder used those portraits being done by Andy as a sales vehicle for their own work. They both immediately went out and said, hey, I'm having a new show of my work, and Andy's portrait of me is going to be in it too, to try to get people to come see it just based off the Warhol name. In fact, here's Fritz Scholder on the left in front of a poster for Art Lines, which was an art magazine in Arizona, New Mexico in the 70s, or 70s and 80s. And he's touting the fact that Andy did his portrait. They put it on the cover of the magazine. He's standing in front of it. In the exhibition will be a letter from Fritz Scholder to Andy Warhol, thanking him for what a great job he did on the portraits and for showing him a good time while they were in New York. Wouldn't you like to have been along on that junket? Andy also reportedly, and when I was in Taos, New Mexico a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to track down some stuff on this. There are people who say Andy Warhol never set foot in Taos, New Mexico. We have several eyewitnesses who placed him there several times. Who knows? I think he liked to go to Taos and drink with R.C. Gorman. On the right is a self-portrait of Scholder. The show that they did was Scholder by Scholder and others. So they actually had a whole show of portraits of Scholder with his self-portraits, and then other artists he got to do portraits of him. No ego involved whatsoever. Andy did a series called Endangered Species, and I picked a couple of those that are particularly kind of Western and American oriented to include in the exhibition. The eagle, of course, and the Bighorn Sheep. Doesn't get much Western than that. Speaking of not much more Western, how about Howdy Doody? It's Howdy Doody time. In one of the writings by one of the critics, he said, Andy picking Howdy Doody is one of the best examples of him knowing what image would resonate with America of a certain period of time. And he gives us an example of this, that when Buffalo Bob and Howdy Doody came to one of the East Coast Ivy League schools in 1969 to do a show, the ROTC kids and the war protester kids put down their disagreements, and they came together in a ballroom like this to sing Howdy Doody songs. So if we just could have taken Howdy Doody to the war negotiations, we could have ended the whole thing in a hurry, I think, right? But he said that's how good Andy was at picking images that would resonate with people and what it meant to them. Howdy and George O'Keeffe, both on the surface of the prints, have what he called diamond dust. Diamond dust is really just cut glass, but they would sprinkle it on the surface of these prints to give it an iridescent and a glowing effect. And you'll see those in both of those in the exhibition. I think this is a very interesting image, and the curators decided to leave it in because Andy was always talking about Texas. Texas was one of his things he was fascinated by. And this just seemed a very Texas kind of statement. Could be anywhere in the South probably. But we thought it was really interesting that Andy would have done this after he'd been shot and made all those comments I told you about being shot. He did a whole series on guns and knives. There's a body of work called Guns and Knives. And you know, maybe it was cathartic for him to do some stuff with the guns and release that energy or emotion. So maybe I'm reading too much into it. Okay, so one of the things I really wanted to do in the exhibit from the very beginning was show how did Andy do these prints. We call them serigraphs, which really is a fancy name for a silkscreen. So when you get right down to it, it's not that much more complicated than a silkscreen t-shirt you would buy at a festival. Except it's art, and they go a few more steps to make it pristine and artful. So you would start with a photograph. You would have done a separation of that photograph based on how many colors you're going to use in the final print. You then would have a transparency that would match up one for one with each color that you're going to do in the exhibition, or in the print. And so what we're going to show in the exhibition is this image, Sitting Bull, separated into 6 colors, and you'll see 6 transparencies. The transparency will be in the upper corner. You'll see the silk screen they made from the transparency, because what you do is you take the transparency, you lay it on a screen that's got an emulsion on it, you burn away where the color's supposed to be, and you leave the rest. And when you drag or squeegee the ink over the part that's been removed from the emulsion, it goes through the silk onto the piece of paper. And you do that each time for however many colors are in the piece. And the really important thing is to get it exactly square with each of the screens, or you're going to get a wonky image. Now, Andy didn't mind wonky. Andy always said, embrace the happy accident. So if they were a little wonky, he actually liked them better because they were more unique. Because it is a hand-done process, each one is going to be slightly different than the rest. Even though there were an addition of 250, they were cranking them out doing 250 of these. When they figured out which one they were going to do, each one would be slightly different because of that hand process. So here's the first color going down, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So that's what it's going to look like. So you'll see those with the screen, the transparency, and the piece of paper 6 times across the exhibition wall. And I think it'll really drive home how this was done and the precision that was required to make these pristine images. Now, once they had done that, they would experiment. They would do what they call trial proofs. They would do 36 different impressions of each of these images, each one with a different color combination. They would take those 36, they'd line them up around the room, and they'd say, which one's the best one? Now, what criteria were they using for best? This is Andy we're talking about. Which one was going to sell the best, right? Not the one's the most artistic or looked the prettiest or had the best color combinations. Which one's going to sell the best? The wonkiest. No, not the wonkiest. So they would take those 36, they would pick the one they thought would sell the best, they run 250 of those. Now you could buy the 36, those are trial proofs. Those are all unique, completely original colors. There's no other one like them in the world. They should be worth a lot more than these if there's 250 of them, right? Wrong. Nobody wants the ones with the trial proof colors because they're not the ones you see all the time. The ones you see all the time that there's 250 of have some familiarity and people think that's what color they're supposed to be. They can't even look at the other ones because it's not the right colors. The art world's crazy sometimes, isn't it? So there were 3 objects that he went to the National Museum of the American Indian and photographed and did prints of. This plain shield is one of them. This is based on a postcard that he found somewhere. Geronimo is one of many of these that are based on famous photographs that he stole from other people. Now, they were in public domain. They were no longer copyrighted, so he's perfectly okay doing that. He got in trouble plenty of other times for doing stuff that wasn't public domain, but other than John Wayne, he steered clear on most of this project. Teddy Roosevelt, and there's a very interesting story behind why he is shown in blackface. I'm not going to tell you that today because we're almost out of time. Remind me at the opening and I'll tell you that story. John Wayne, we've already talked about. Anybody know what movie this was from? Liberty Valance. Annie Oakley. Custer. Again, there's a story why he's in white. So come back for that. Or read the book. It's in the book. The Northwest Coast Shield. Again, this is one of the ones that was at the National Indian Museum. Same with this Kachina. He took one picture of one Kachina and he just doubled it, so it's the same thing twice. I will give you a little insight on this one, pun intended. What is the Indian staring at? The word liberty. Does that strike anybody as ironic? Now it's that way on the coin. Andy didn't come up with that. I mean, if you look at an Indian head nickel, the Indian is looking at the word liberty. Did that not strike anybody in 1903 as a little ironic? Apparently not, because we adopted it as our coinage. But I think Andy has brought that up even more in his treatment and really made it come up and made something of it. Again, I don't believe that he doesn't have social commentary and political leanings in some of his work. So the Buffalo nickel doesn't make the cut. I told you they had 14 images that they experimented with, did 36 trial proofs. These suites were meant to be 10 images. So they had to get rid of 4. This is one of the ones they got rid of. I think it maybe is more interesting. I don't know. What do you guys think? Which one do you like better? Indian head or the buffalo? I'm hearing half and half. They were going to do both, obviously, so it was going to be one or the other. It might have been a coin flip. This is my favorite image in the whole project. It's called Action Picture. And the reason it's my favorite probably is because it's based on a real painting by Charles Schreibvogel that's in the collection of the Gilcrease Museum. So if you start out with great material, you can't help but end up with a great picture, right? And there's a story why it didn't make the cut. And we'll have that painting here, by the way. It's worth coming to see the show just to see that painting and not see any Andy's work. This is called Indian Warrior. And for the longest time, we couldn't figure out what movie this was from because in the information that Andy left, they didn't say. And because it didn't make the cut, it wasn't listed with the others as to what the source material was. Now get this, the designer of the book finds this out reading what I have written about it, goes to Google, does a reverse image search in Google, and finds out the movie this was from. After I spent the last 5 years asking all my Western movie friends and historians and film people, do you know what movie this might come from? It took him about 32 nanoseconds to find out it was from a movie called White Feather in 1955. And then here's Sitting Bull. And poor Sitting Bull, in one of the stories at the beginning of the production of this project, a famous Western historian goes with Andy up to the National American Indian Museum to shoot those objects that I showed you. And he writes in his article how cool he thought it would be that the yuppies were going to learn the story of Sitting Bull because Andy was doing his picture. Well, he doesn't make the cut. So Sitting Bull got killed twice. And the historian was very disappointed. Now, they actually did run 250 of this and then decided not to use it. So there's 250 of these floating around out in the world that aren't numbered. You think there might be some fakes in there too? So be careful if you go buy this image. All right, so get the book if you want. I'll be back there to sign them if you want. Remember, this is a major traveling exhibition. Let your friends know in Washington and Oklahoma it's coming near them if they can't get here. Thanks again to our sponsors. Big round of applause for our sponsors. Remind your non-member friends, it opens the 25th, but if they want to become members, but wait, there's more. Circle, 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 circle members, August 23rd. Members, August 24th. Thank you for coming out today. We look forward to seeing you back at the opening.